It started with a letter, one of those plain white envelopes that looks innocent until you read the return address. Oak Gardens Zoning Committee. I didn't even need to open it to know it was trouble. Oak Gardens is the kind of neighborhood where everything has to match. The lawns are manicured, the fences are all white picket, and the paint on your door better not be more than 3 shades off from the approved palette. I used to joke that it was like living in a showroom for mediocrity. Still, I always played along. I mowed the lawn every weekend, pressure washed the driveway every spring, even went to the occasional HOA meeting just to stay on their good side. But that all changed the day I added a little more color to my house. It started with a flagpole. It's just a simple, sturdy 20-footer I installed in the front yard. I wanted to fly the American flag like my grandfather did, proudly and without apology. A couple of neighbors waved as I hoisted it up for the first time. One even gave me a thumbs up, but a few days later, I started getting the looks. You know, the ones tight-lipped smiles, raised eyebrows, people walking their dogs across the street instead of in front of my place. I shrugged it off. Then I painted the shutters red, white, and blue. I thought it looked sharp. Patriotic? Sure, but not gaudy. It gave the house character. And it wasn't like I'd turned it into a circus. I used quality paint, kept the lines crisp. My cousin even helped me install some soft LED lights that cast a warm glow upward in the evenings. Subtle, tasteful, and proud. That's what I was going for. But apparently that was one star-spangled step too far. When the letter finally arrived, I opened it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand. Your property has been found to be in violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards, it read. I had to reread that line twice. Violations? For what, loving my country too visibly? It listed things like unauthorized flagpole, unapproved, paint scheme, and non-conforming ornamental structures. I looked out my window at the modest bald eagle sculpture perched over my porch. I'd picked it up at an antique store outside of Gettysburg. Weathered bronze, wings outstretched. Wasn't some cheap plastic monstrosity. It was art to me. It symbolized everything this country stood for. The letter went on to say that I had 14 days to bring the property into compliance or face escalating fines. I laughed. Then I read it again just to make sure it wasn't a joke. It wasn't. Multiple someones had reported my house, probably submitted photos, probably had whispered conversations behind their neatly trimmed hedges, deciding that my version of America wasn't the one they wanted to see every morning. I wasn't angry at first, just confused. I walked outside and looked at my house. Way they must have seen it. The crisp flag flying in the morning breeze, the patriotic shutters catching the sunlight. The Liberty Bell-shaped wind chime my niece got me last Christmas, tinkling softly in the wind. What exactly was offensive here? What was too much? The truth hit me hard. It wasn't what I'd done. It was what it represented. Oak Gardens had always been more about control than community. They liked things orderly, uniform, predictable. But my house? It stood out. It dared to have a personality. And worse, it dared to be proud. That's what bothered them. Not the aesthetics. The audacity. I thought about letting it go. Painting over the shutters. Taking down the eagle. Pulling the flagpole out of the ground. It would have been easier, quieter. But then I thought about my grandfather, who lost 2 fingers at Normandy. He never talked much about the war, but he flew the flag every single day of his life. Even when he couldn't climb the ladder anymore, he'd ask me to do it, rain or shine. I thought about my dad, who marched for civil rights in the 60s, arrested twice for disturbing the peace. He kept a tiny flag in his breast pocket every day until the day he died. Said it reminded him that this country could still change. And I thought about myself standing in uniform at 22, watching Old Glory rise over a dusty compound overseas. The anthem playing softly from a speaker, a lump in my throat every single time. That flag wasn't just fabric, it was memory. Sacrifice. Hope so, no. I wasn't taking anything down. Instead, I walked out to the edge of my property and adjusted the flag so it caught the wind just right.
Oh.
I straightened the eagle statue on the porch, and then I went back inside and poured another cup of coffee. Letting the HOA letter sit there on the counter like a declaration of war. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. But it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be angry. It would be precise, tactical. I knew better than to yell or threaten or make a scene. That's what they wanted. No. I would fight them with paperwork, with precedent, with history. I would use every ounce of knowledge I had about how things work in this country, and I had a lot. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. Good man, sharp mind, and fortunately for me, a fellow Marine. I told him the story. He paused for a moment, then said, well, this could get interesting. It would, because I wasn't just going to keep my flag up. I was going to make sure no one could ever tell me to take it down again that weekend. I decided if they thought my house was too patriotic before, they hadn't seen anything yet. I didn't do it out of spite, not entirely. But something about that letter lit a fire in me. The nerve of a neighborhood committee trying to tell a veteran how much was too much when it came to honoring the country he served. It felt personal, so I leaned into it. Saturday morning, I was up at dawn. I went to the local hardware store and bought enough solar spotlights to make the flag on my lawn visible from space. I wanted it lit at night, in accordance with the U.S. flag code, but also to make a point. You can't hide pride in darkness. I installed the lights carefully, aiming them just right, making sure there was no light spillover into my neighbor's precious azaleas. I didn't want to give them any new ammunition. Then, I swung by the nursery and picked up trays of red, white, and blue petunias. They were bursting with color, perfect for the walkway up to the front porch. A nice border of stars and stripes. Cheerfulness. While I was at it, I added a couple of small American flags to the flower beds. Tasteful ones, nothing plastic or flimsy. I staked them carefully, straight as soldiers standing in formation. But the piece de resistance was the mailbox. I had it custom made by a retired metal worker who ran a little welding shop just outside of town. I'd known him from the VFW hall, and he was always game for a challenge. You want a what? He asked over the phone. A Liberty Bell-shaped mailbox, I said. Not huge, just enough to get the message across. He chuckled. You want it cracked like the real one? Absolutely. 3 days later, he delivered it himself. It was perfect. Bronze finish, a subtle patina, and a little hatch-in. The back to collect letters. Even had a magnetic latch so the wind wouldn't blow it open. I installed it right by the curb, in full compliance with postal regulations. It's not an inch out of place. By Sunday night, my house gleamed with pride. Da-da. Kind of pride that comes from more than decorations. It comes from memory, sacrifice, and a quiet belief that some things are worth standing up for. And sure enough, by Monday morning, the complaints rolled in. I got 3 more letters from the HOA over the course of that week, each one more desperate than the last. The first one accused me of escalating noncompliance. The second referred to my deliberate provocation. The third simply warned that I was now facing $100 per day in fines until I removed all unapproved modifications. That's when I knew I was winning. The HOA works like most bureaucracies. They bank on intimidation. They expect people to roll over the moment they get a letter with official-sounding language, and most do. But I wasn't most people. Had a decade in the Marines. I'd stood across from far more terrifying forces than a group of retired accountants in golf carts. Still, the fines weren't an empty threat. Legally, the HOA had the power to impose them. They could even place a lien on my house if I ignored them long enough. That's when I knew I had to find another way forward. I needed to go on offense. So I started digging. I pulled out the HOA bylaws. All 87 pages of them. Dry as a dessert and just as tedious. I read them cover to cover, underlined sections, highlighted contradictions, and made notes in the margins. They had nothing explicitly banning flags, flagpoles, or even patriotic decorations. They had vague language about exterior, harmony and visual consistency, but no actual rules that applied to me. I sent them a letter pointing that out. Politely, the day the City Preservation Office sent someone out to inspect my house. I could practically feel the HOA's collective blood pressure spike. A silver sedan pulled up to the curb around 9:15 a.m. Out stepped a tall woman in her early 50s, wearing horn-rimmed glasses and carrying a leather-bound notebook. Her name was Angela Moore, Senior Historical Site Evaluator for the county. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a curious look as she scanned the exterior of the house, then smiled. "Well," she said, "you certainly have a theme going." "That I do," I replied. "Would you like some coffee before we begin?" She declined, but chuckled politely. I could tell she was used to more traditional applicants, people restoring. It's century-old homes, with lace curtains and period-accurate sconces. Not guys like me who installed a bald eagle statue on their porch and had a mailbox shaped like the Liberty Bell. But she was fair and open-minded. That's all I needed. We spent over an hour walking through the house. I showed her the original crown molding still intact in the living room, the brick fireplace with an 1895 engraving chiseled into the base, and the upstairs study where, according to my research, Captain Elias Warner used to write letters to his wife during his time in office as a state legislator. I even had a yellowed photo of him sitting on the front porch, flag in hand, pipe in mouth, a stern and dignified figure from another age. Angela took careful notes, asked thoughtful questions, and genuinely seemed impressed. "You've done your homework," she said, flipping through some of the documents I'd gathered with Sam's help. Newspaper articles, census records, even an archived invitation to the 1910 suffragette gathering held right here in the parlor. That was the hook, the crossover appeal of both military and social heritage that gave the application weight. After her visit, the waiting began. It would take several weeks for the Preservation Board to meet, review the case, and vote. In the meantime, the HOA wasn't slowing down. They kept sending letters, kept piling on fines. They even threatened to initiate legal proceedings to protect neighborhood integrity. Their tone grew more aggressive, and I knew they were starting to panic, because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about precedent. If I succeeded, others might follow. Others might refuse to roll over, to stay quiet. And to the HOA, that kind of defiance was contagious. They called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. According to HOA bylaws, any dues-paying member has a right to attend. I showed up in a crisp, collared shirt, my old military ID tucked in my wallet, and took a seat in the back of the community clubhouse, where they held their sessions. There were maybe 30 people there, mostly retirees, most of whom had never spoken a word to me before. But that night they looked at me like I was a threat. The president of the HOA, a short, red-faced man named Walter Gibbons, was already standing at the front. He was the kind of guy who always wore a Bluetooth headset for no reason, even though he wasn't on the phone. "Let's get one thing straight," he barked to the room. "We're not attacking patriotism here. We're simply trying to preserve the character and standards of our community." I raised my hand. He ignored me, so I stood up. "May I ask a question?" clearly and calmly. He exhaled sharply. "You may, but be brief." "Can you show me the part of the HOA bylaws that prohibits a flagpole?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Gibbons blinked. "It's not the flagpole specifically, it's the overall presentation." I nodded. "Then what exactly am I violating?" "Because I've reviewed the bylaws, and unless I missed a clause outlawing patriotism, I'm not in violation of anything enforceable." He sputtered for a moment. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like the problem isn't the flag or the decorations, it's that I dared to be different. I dared to remind everyone that individuality still matters, that pride in one's country isn't tacky, it's honorable." The room was quiet. No one clapped, but no one interrupted either. I sat down, heart pounding but face calm. After the meeting, a few people approached me. One woman thanked me. Another said she hadn't realized how strict the rules had become. A third man, a Korean War vet with a slow limp, said, "They told me to take my flag down once. I wish I'd had the guts to do what you're doing." That night, I knew something had shifted. The media found out not long after. Some local reporter got wind of the historical designation application and ran a story titled, "Veteran Battles HOA Over Patriotic Home History May Be on His Side." It spread like wildfire. Within days, I had phone calls from veterans groups. Emails from people across the country, even a church in Texas, asking if they could send me a custom banner of support. I accepted it, hung it right under the eaves. Then the day finally came. I received an official letter from the city. I opened it with shaking hands. It read, "After thorough review and due consideration, your property has been approved for designation as a local historic landmark." It went on to explain that this designation protected the property's exterior features from modification mandates by any non-governmental entity, including, by name, homeowner associations. It was over. They couldn't find me. They couldn't touch a single brick of my home. Best of all, they now had to respect it. The bald eagle on the porch, historic. The flagpole, essential. The Liberty Bell mailbox, an expressive element of the home's preserved Americana character. HOA's final letter came 2 days later. It was short, bitter, and begrudgingly formal, in light of the recent designation of your property. All previous violation notices have been rescinded. No further action will be taken. Sam and I celebrated over beer and barbecue on the back. "Porch, you didn't just beat them," he said. "You turned the whole thing around. They wanted you to hide your pride, and now they're legally required to live with it." I grinned. "Better than that," I said. It historic asterisk, a week later. I got a knock on the door from someone I didn't recognize, a teenage boy holding a school tablet. "Hey," he said shyly. "My civics teacher said we could do our project on local landmarks. I picked your house. Is that okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, kid, it's more than okay. Let me tell you about Captain Warner." The morning after that, civics student knocked on my door. I stood in the front yard, sipping coffee from my chipped Semper Fi mug, and looked at the house with new eyes. What had started as an act of defiance had turned into something bigger than I ever imagined. The flag flapped proudly in the early breeze. The spotlights that had once been branded excessive thematic lighting now glinted off the gold. Trim on the newly installed bronze plaque, asterisk designated historic landmark, City of Clarksville. ST 189 for asterisk. Cars slowed down when they passed, not in judgment anymore, but in curiosity, even admiration. Some snapped pictures, others honked in support. Veterans stopped by just to shake my hand. The neighborhood kids used my front yard as a marker, turned left at the house with the big eagle. But not everyone was thrilled. Walter Gibbons and the HOA, now completely defanged, had gone mostly silent. I still saw them on their daily patrols, clipboards in hand, sunglasses on, scanning lawns for grass, a half-inch too tall or a flower bed spilling over the walkway. They avoided eye contact now. The last time Walter passed by my house, he glanced up at the new historic landmark sign and grimaced like he'd bitten into a lemon. I just smiled and waved. One morning I noticed something strange. A couple of neighbors, people who had once rolled their eyes at my flag. Displays had put out their own small American flags by their mailboxes. One even put up a red, white, and blue bunting across her porch. Another neighbor, a retired teacher, painted her front steps a deep navy blue with white stars stenciled across them. It wasn't just me anymore. The too patriotic house was starting to look more like the most honest house on the block. There was a quiet ripple effect happening. My stand gave others permission to be proud, to express themselves, and not just with flags. One neighbor repainted his door a bold teal, said it reminded him of his Jamaican roots. Another installed a small wind sculpture of a dancing woman, because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden back in New Mexico, and the HOA. Well, they weren't thrilled about this artistic awakening, but after what happened with my house, they had to walk carefully. No one wanted to be the next headline. Then came an email from Angela Moore. She wrote, "Hi, Mr. Granger. I just wanted to thank you again for your efforts and dedication to preserving the character of your home and honoring its history. The board was impressed not just with your application, but with your passion. I was wondering if you'd be open to speaking at the Historical Society luncheon next month about your experience." Asterisk me? A speaker? I almost laughed out loud. I was a former Marine who barely made it through public speaking in high school, and now they wanted me to stand in front of a room full of local historians in tweed jackets and give a talk? I replied, "Sure, why not?" The luncheon took place in a brick-walled hall downtown. There were folding chairs and lukewarm chicken salads, sandwiches, and pitchers of iced tea. I wore a clean blazer and brought a few old photos of the house, the one of Captain Warner on the porch, one from the 1920s with Model Ts in the driveway, and one from last year with the flag flying high. When they called my name, I took a breath and stepped to the podium. I didn't plan to make history, I began. I just wanted to keep flying my flag. The room chuckled softly, and I relaxed. I told them the whole story. The letter, the fines, the digging through archives, the late nights with my lawyer combing through bylaws. I also told them about how the fight reminded me why I'd joined the service in the first place. It reminded me that freedom isn't just about laws and flags, it's about the right to stand your ground when someone tells you to sit down. I ended with a simple line. They said my house was too patriotic. Now it's a historic landmark. Go figure. The room erupted in applause. Several people stood. One woman wiped away tears. Another came up afterward and said, "My father served in World War II. He would have loved your story." The article about the luncheon ended up on the front page of the local paper. Again, then came a call from a state legislator's office. They were drafting a bill to protect homeowners' rights to display patriotic symbols in HOA-edulated neighborhoods. They wanted me to testify at the State House. I laughed, half in disbelief, and said, "You guys are serious." They were so. There I was again, weeks later, standing in a different kind of room, under brighter lights, testifying in front of people in suits and ties. I told them my story the same way I had at the luncheon. No, but this time, with more fire. Patriotism isn't a nuisance, I said. It's not a landscaping violation. It's part of who we are. No one should be told their love for this country is too much. The bill passed. Not by a landslide, but enough news stations picked up the story, first local, then regional. One of them called me the Patriot of Clarksville. I laughed at that. It was ridiculous, but also not entirely wrong. One day, as I was raking leaves, a minivan pulled up and a woman stepped out with her young son. She looked nervous. "Hi," she said. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but my son wanted to see the landmark house. He saw it on the news." I smiled. "You're not bothering me at all." The boy stepped forward, wide-eyed, staring at the eagle on the porch and the plaque by the steps. "Is this really a special house?" he asked. I knelt down and nodded. But not because it's big or fancy, because someone stood up for it. He looked up at me. "Can I have a flag like that someday?" I smiled and handed him one of the small handheld flags I kept in a pot by the front door for visitors. "You can have this one." As they left, I stood there watching the flag ripple in the breeze, the sun glinting off the brass plate. My house hadn't changed all that much, but the meaning of it had. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was a symbol of history, of quiet, resistance, of pride that couldn't be measured or tamed. They said my house was too patriotic. Now it's part of American history, and it all started with a flag I refused to take down,